Hi, I'm Dave Irvine, Executive Director at the Highland Center for Natural History, and by now you all know that we are celebrating our 25th anniversary of the incorporation of the Highland Center. And today with this video, we're back where it all started, at the Community Nature Center site on the log cabin porch. And I am honored to be joined by my guest today, Nichole Trushell, who is the founding director of the Highland Center and was director here at CNC for quite a few years before the Highland Center happened. So we'll talk back about the roots of this organization and how it all began. And you were a key person in making all that happen. So just tell us, was it the early 90s when you first were selected to be part of the Community Nature Center? And just tell us about those early years.
It was 1991, okay. July 22nd. I know because it was my mom's birthday. I started in the summer of 91. And I had not too long before that moved back to the Prescott area. I grew up in Prescott, and then left, of course, to pursue other interests and education and travels. But we came back and I was here with my kids and I was looking for meaningful employment really in this area, small town, at least at that time it was a pretty small town. Yeah. And this job came up because a longtime friend of mine, Helene Kaplan, who was a volunteer here at the time, told me about the job. And I went and interviewed and it felt like a great fit, and I guess in the long run it was.
Yeah. So back then you were the only staff, correct?
I was, and they didn't have a lot of money, which is never a news story. But I actually started half-time and kept another job I was in at the time, half-time. And then in about 6 months, me being here and working with others, we came up with enough funding with my board members and the school district and the Forest Service all involved to get me on to full-time.
Yeah. So what were the greatest challenges and maybe joys of that early moments of time?
Well, the greatest challenges, of course, are always money. You know that very well. Yeah. That never stops. And the greatest, I think that was the greatest challenge because we had this beautiful site. I was so impressed with this place. And actually, Henry Dahlberg and Ken Walker were involved in, of course, starting this site. And Henry Dahlberg was my teacher in high school, and we had remained friends. And it was a thrill for me to come back here and think about making this into an environmental education center or participating in that again, because it had gone into kind of a lull. And the community decided they really wanted the nature center, and that's how I kind of then came on board. They needed a director. As far as my greatest joys, those, I think, in spite of the fact that being at the Highland Center and figuring all that out was a great joy too. Yeah. But it was here that we really developed our docent program, really increased the number of volunteers. I think there was about 10 or 12 volunteers total when I first came. Yeah. And so, finding more people that would be interested, figuring out how to inspire them to want to teach children at that time was what we focused on in the outdoors. And then also bringing the wonder that I myself feel for the natural world as a biologist into this place in a way that people could enjoy themselves. Actually, when I first came, one challenge for me was I had come out of a pure science world. And so I would start down my path speaking more scientifically about different things here, and I had to learn to adjust. It wasn't super hard because all of that is based, of course, in wonder and interest in the natural world. But back to being a great joy was being with the docents, developing that program. But I was out here almost every day teaching children. Yeah. And I love being with children outdoors. I feel like it's just sort of a natural gift, if you want to call it that, with me, is loving kids and loving to take them outside. And so that was a great joy. And it was never easy. It's not easy for you now. It was never easy for me, but those first years were simpler. in some ways. You know, it was like my list probably wasn't quite as long, even though the points were challenging. So,
well, I find it amazing that you didn't have that experience working with kids, because everybody I have talked to, all those docents that you trained, all tell me stories about you and how Nichole would do it and how great you were, and you were great. I mean, but it's just that you
well, I
picked that
didn't have
up.
training in that. It's just
You picked it up
I had
really fast.
kids, and it's just how I am. You know,
Yeah.
I always had my kids outside and was teaching them, and it just sort of naturally evolved. And also, over the years, I was around a lot of other great teachers of children that you always learned from other people. So that was good. A challenge too, back to the challenge, they're coming and going in my mind, is people that would come that had taught children often had to let go of some of their preconceived notions about how you teach children. Because it is different, you know, getting kids outside.
Yeah, it's different than being in the classroom, or
Yeah.
it's different than telling people what a plant is.
Yes.
You know, you have to kind of make that experiential for them.
Yeah, teach people how to teach children to look rather than just telling them the answers to things. Sometimes it was a challenge to get people to figure out how to do that.
Yeah.
And some people, it's interesting, some people that had never taught children sometimes found an easier way of that path than people who had taught as classroom teachers.
Yeah,
You know?
you have to unlearn some
Yeah,
things. It's
unlearn.
harder than learning
Right, because
sometimes.
management's different.
Yeah,
Management's
exactly.
different.
So you were here at CNC for several years, and then sort of this vision evolved for a new place. Tell us how that all kind of came to be, and why that happened, and what were the steps in that process.
Well, we loved this place. We always loved this beautiful site because it's unique, really. And but it was owned by the school district, and they gave us a little bit of funding every year and some office space. But we didn't have a lot of flexibility. It wasn't very long that I realized we needed some kind of a staff building, visitors space, indoor classroom, because at that point we had kids out. There was no other option except this little cabin, which is not, we would build a fire in there, but it was hard if weather was inclement. It looked like we needed to grow in a lot of different ways, and it was a bit of a catch-22 here. Great place, not much room for expansion, not our own site really, even though we were here. And the community thought we were funded by the schools. And so then seeking funding opportunities for me that was kind of challenging. It's like, well, you already have money, right? And I'm like, well, no. So all of those things led me to finally seek help. And I applied for a grant to get a mentor director to come and look at our program. Somebody had a parallel center, really, a parallel experience. And it was Karen Sausman from the Living Desert Museum in Palm Desert, California, a beautiful center. I went and visited her. And she had developed that in the 70s, again, like where this place started in the 70s, on BLM land. And she really just looked at our whole program, our increase in students now just not just coming from Prescott, but Chino Valley and Prescott Valley, and increase in adult visitation. And she said, you need to move. If you're looking at really being a regional center, this is not the place. And so I was surprised at that comment and said, we can't begin to afford land in Prescott. Even then, it was very expensive. And she said, you don't need to buy it. By BLM experience, you've got a great relationship with the Prescott National Forest, which we did with board members and funding even. She said, talk to them. And actually I had a good friend, I remembered it was Malcolm Hamilton that I proposed this idea to about a unique partnership. This idea was unique. And he said, I don't see why not. And that gave me, I guess, the courage to then pursue that, talk to our board about it, and then talk more to the Forest Service leadership, about this concept. And everybody, it was like that right idea at the right time. There really were not walls. It was all just kept, it wasn't, again, not easy, but it kept opening for us.
And not fast, but
not fast,
because nothing happens
but,
fast.
Well, and certainly nothing. Yes, nothing fast with Forest Service. But Malcolm again, Hamilton, and I did look around the area for sites, and it was that place by Lynx Lake, which I actually did explore as a child, that became the #1 area because of closeness to Highway 69, to Tri-City development, Tri-City at that time, and yet still having that feeling of being in the woods, that we wanted, quiet and forest.
And a lot of diversity.
And a lot of diversity. We were focusing on the diversity of the Central Highlands. And even before we called it the Highland Center, we were focusing on that unique diversity of this part of Arizona and into New Mexico. And that site was a microcosm, I always said, of that, with the forest, Ponderosa Pine Forest, the riparian area, the chaparral, and then woodland elements. And you could see the grasslands. At that time you could see grasslands. Now it's more developed, but so it really was a great little spot for that. And
a lot of people might not know about how the Highland Center got its name. So, and then you were kind of leading into that, but maybe tell us a little bit more. Why the Highland Center? Why was that the name that you chose? And
at that time, there was a lot of conversation about what to call this sort of transition zone. Geologists called it transition zone. You saw Arizona uplands, you saw highlands in some literature. And so I started talking to biologists I knew about how we define that and how we call that. And we kicked around words like uplands, which isn't a very pretty word compared to highlands. And we kicked around, was it going to be a nature center? We were going to call it it was a nature center, but were we going to call it a nature center? Harley Shaw at the time, Carl Tomoff and I sat down and looked at regional maps and started to kind of put lines around where the Highland Center definition might be, above the Sonoran Desert, below the Mogollon Rim, basically. And where is that east and west? And then it was really a collective adventure in naming where little pieces would come in. Well, let's call it the Highlands, but then what Highlands what? And then there came up Highlands Center for Nature. And I think actually that was Robert Burford's idea, who became one of our architects. And then Highlands Center, somewhere natural history came up. And as I said actually last night in our gathering, natural history has this important piece of participation in study. And that's why we ended up with kind of a long name, Highlands Center for Natural History, but that is why we ended up using the words natural history, and it had a handy HCNH. Maybe we couldn't always say Highlands Center for Natural History, but we could say Highlands Center easily, and we could say HCNH pretty easily.
Well, I think it's interesting you now hear the Central Highlands mentioned often by people in this region, not just even ecology people, but even other people defining it. So in a lot of ways, I think you and those other founders helped define some of the personality of the region. That
is true. The word Highlands was not used around here. People didn't, and that's part of our mission, as you know, is helping people understand they are in a unique place and connecting with that place. And it was interesting watching that word bubble up. And it wasn't here very much.
And it is now.
It is, right. I know.
So you guys can take credit for that.
And I think uplands wouldn't have been as popular.
No, it would have come to the uplands area. No, I agree. So you're at the center now. You're building that site out, which took several years in phase one to build out, and
lots of planning.
I understand that it takes time, and so what were some of the challenges and exciting moments there at that era when you were just kind of creating the center, basically from scratch?
Yeah, we were. Well, what was really fun for me was literally being the one that got to imagine where things were going to be. And I did go out with architects and different land planner people and look at the site, Forest Service, of course, and where would we put things if we wanted a learning center, and how would we make the minimal impact while doing what we wanted to do. And that was the very early renditions, was we could do an amphitheater and a restroom because we had funding for that. The Arizona State Parks actually had a grants program at the time. There were 2, and I can't remember the second grant, but there were 2 grants through the state that we received for the Highland Center that helped with that sort of a park-like development that the amphitheater and the restroom fill into. So we had those funding positive bumps. The other piece that was really fun was laying out the trails, and I honestly did that by myself. I went out and flagged where I thought the trails should go, and then I was going to bring back a Forest Service trails person to really lay it out with me. So I went back, and the flagging was all down. Someone had come and taken down all my trails flagging, which had taken me hours and hours to do. But the second rendition was faster, and I had a trails guy with me, and I knew where I wanted to go. So that was great fun, figuring out where the trails would go. At the time, there was beautiful, enormous ponderosa pines that I intentionally built the trails around them. And then in 2002, I guess it was, with the beetle kills, we lost all those big trees in the area. And one of them even got taken out by a logging company, because I was afraid it was going to fall on somebody. Those hard decisions. It would have been a great snag, but not next to the trail, So those were great things. Laying it out, dreaming about what it would be. And even then early, we had the location for the Learning Center, but we didn't have funding for it. That came over time. So I don't know if I completely answered your question or not. It took a lot of years in there. We started using the site and figuring it out, but staff we weren't there. We were crazy different places and offices.
I know the office is another
saga.
story.
It's a saga.
Well, the mobile offices all throughout town.
Right. We moved a lot, and we weren't together as staff, and there were a lot of challenges because we didn't have an office building, So we had to figure that out.
And through this time, you've been both a biologist, a educator, a teacher, a administrator, a fundraiser. How did you, balance all those hats?
I'm not sure, except that I think my natural tendency is to be a little bit of a jack of all trades. And I worked at the Desert Botanical Garden as a young woman and taught programs taught in backcountry programs, found that I loved to teach outdoors. And I also learned a lot about how nonprofits run, even though I was down the staff chain. I still saw our challenges, was involved in fundraisers. Then I went back to graduate school and got more involved in research. I went to Ecuador and lived a couple years, but I brought all of that kind of with me. And then I became a mom, which brings another facet to the mix. And I think it's probably just that little bit of a propensity to like to do a lot of different things, more than one thing. And for years and years, I just loved that my job was so diverse. I would go figure out how to have a docent program and figure out how to teach them about climate and whatever. I was botany, and then I would go figure out a second grade program or a fourth grade program or a summer event. I think it was that diversity that was fun for me. And for years and years, I was really happy in those shoes. Fundraising was always a challenge for me, and I was always trying to come up with new ways of doing that. I don't have your skill set of fundraising, but what I felt like I was good at was inspiring people about the idea of what we were doing. And so a lot of people, as you know, a lot of people turn into big donors that you have no idea. And that happened multiple times because they became inspired through the docent program. They became inspired about teaching children, and then they started giving us large sums of money that I do know from working in more than one nonprofit in my life that there is usually a few angels, donor angels, that make something a reality, and
Yes.
then from there you add. Right.
Yeah.
And I felt like that was that. So really, I think if I had a gift, it was about inspiring people that what we were doing was important.
Yeah, and the
And that
passion
turns
for it.
into funding.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah.
I wrote grants. I know how. I don't like to. I had great volunteers like Jan Lovelady at the time, who was and Eileen Ferguson, who were great sort of eyes on things for me, detail. How we write things, how we think about things, and so it's always a team effort. It
Yeah.
always, and I was lucky who showed up. I was really always fortunate with who showed up. So that's part of the deal.
Yeah, and drawing the right people and getting the right people,
Inspired.
inspired and on the bus and heading in the right direction.
Yeah.
You can do that, and
Yeah.
then you got an
Then
organization.
ultimately you do, and
Yeah.
we did, because of some of those big donors that loved us and their connections to other big donors in the area. And I think because I always was adamant that we would not get involved in any environmental education. By definition should not be involved in taking sides.
Right.
And I fought hard always that we stayed that way, and we built trust in the ranching community, the
Yes.
James family and the Polks with Key Keffers and Margaret T. Morris. I feel like that was great success, because we
Yes.
didn't want to just be talking to one bunch of people. We wanted everyone to love the Highlands Center. That's success, that every parent feels comfy that their kid comes and spends a day with us.
Exactly.
So those were other pieces, I think, of funding success, and ultimately then led to the funding of the James Learning Center, with obviously that family, but the Key Keffers and the Bensons and others that were involved in giving. And I was really proud, I have to say, that I left us, as you know, with no debt.
Yes, I was very appreciative of that.
I didn't have our annual thing figured out that great, but I did leave you with no debt.
The hardest thing to raise money for is debt. So that was a great gift. That
Yeah,
you
I
gave
called
to
it
me.
Burn the Note.
Yeah,
I had a
yeah.
Burn the Note program that I brought to the board. It's like, we got to burn the note.
Yeah, that was a great gift. And you mentioned too that both of your kids were involved in the Highlands Center, and tell us a little bit. I know some of this history, but tell us a little bit about how they either chose or were coerced into helping.
Coerced is probably, well, I always, from the time my kids were tiny, we were outside, always. I mean, because that is what I believed in. And that was what I was good at, I guess, with kids. And so they spent a lot of time outside. So by the time I was here, it was just a natural, as they grew up with me, we grew up together here, then they just got more and more involved. And they came to the 2nd and 4th grade programs, both of them, and they were little smart alecks when they did. Joan Dukes could tell you, my daughter was quite a smart aleck when she came to the 2nd grade program. And then when we started the original Wander the Wild, which was a late August family event, it started on the Prescott National Forest. Actually, my idea was that we would have a program every summer moving through the Prescott National Forest and have a theme, but this kind of 12 stations family event, make us some money, which everybody told me was a crazy idea, but we did make thousands on it every year. That was where my kids got involved. It really got involved because we had face painting stations and we had crafts based on the theme, and I got really stressed out in the summer before this event where thousands of people would come and 12 stations of volunteers to organize and develop ideas for all those stations. I think they also were involved because their mother was so stressed through the summer, but they had a great time. It's good for kids to volunteer.
It is.
And then Mara also, my daughter, Ian is my son, Mara's my daughter, who's the younger child, also volunteered with once Fiona was doing summer programs, Mara started volunteering with her, and I don't know if she was ever paid. I actually can't even remember, but she did work in those summer programs with Fiona, teaching kids outdoors at the new site and here at the Community Nature Center. They both ultimately became biologists, and I never crammed much down their throats. We just went outside and looked at stuff. And my son's a doctor now, and Mara actually worked for you, so you know this story. But she took Lisa Packard's position and the habitat coordinator, and then became education director.
And did a great job.
And she has even more of that skill set, I think, as a teacher than I do by far. She's really, that's her gift.
We were sorry to lose her to the classroom, but she made a great impact when she was with us as an education director.
Right. Well, and then you got Felipe, and he was a good one too. And she, she's in the classroom again now, and she does bring those same getting kids outdoor skills she gets them outside even when she has 50 minutes, which is still a good thing for kids.
Yeah, and
of all ages.
Having a great impact there too.
It's easy to inspire people when you're outside.
Yeah.
It's true.
So, and when you think back just, of this whole journey and how it's the impact that you've had on this community and on maybe individual kids. I mean, we have probably hundreds of thousands of kids who have come through the
amazing,
Highland Center
isn't it?
over these, even 25 years, even going back, more going back into CNC.
Yeah.
What kind of those moments stand out to you as being the most exciting and impactful that you remember?
This particular theme repeated over and over again. And what it is I saw over and over again that the kid that was often kind of labeled as the problem kid in the classroom or the kid that wasn't engaged in learning, if we could get them out here for a day, it would flip.
Yeah.
And they would often become the successful kid and the knowledgeable kid and the kind of head of the class kid. All of a sudden, their teacher would be amazed that we weren't having trouble with the kid. That was always one of the things that I felt best about, We weren't necessarily going to reach every kid, but we were going to reach a lot of kids. And those kids that got to feel successful that didn't usually, that was my biggest gift. Another event that happened to me once was, because I never got mad at kids. I don't get mad at kids for smashing in, that's not a good way to learn, right?
Right.
But I remember I was out at Coyote Springs actually with Lisa's class at the Habitat Garden, and there was some boys tormenting cicadas under this tree they were supposed to be exploring, and they were tormenting. And all I did was sit down, held one in my hand, had them really look at it, told them a little of their life history, showed them their beautiful wings, told them they lived underground and all these things. These 5 boys, I watched them change. Wow. That all of a sudden this thing I was tormenting is something really cool. Yeah. And then I'm going to go home and tell my family that these are cool. And that those little teachable moments happen every day when you're out with kids.
Yes.
And no matter if you're interested in kids and want to be outside, they happen for you.
And even if they're not in your lesson plan, those are the most important moments.
And that was one of the hard things to teach the docents is if whatever happens that's cool, give up the lesson plan.
Yeah.
The other thing that I loved here, I was convinced that kids could be quiet and listen. And people told me I was crazy. Kids can't sit for 20 minutes and listen. And they were wrong. Kids can sit just fine for 20 minutes. And I used to take the kids down the pond here is where I started, 4th graders, and I'd say, your challenge is to sit here quietly for 20 minutes. And you don't get to talk, and you don't get to, what I want you to do is watch and listen and write. And we would have them write about their observations, usually without a lot of structure. And I'd said, something magical is going to happen if you can just be still. And you could count on that being true. A bird would show up or a lizard would go by.
Yeah.
And so many kids figured out that they could have a wonderful moment in nature if they could learn to be quiet for just 10 minutes, And watching that over and over again was wonderful. Yeah.
And it continues today, over and over again.
And over and over again. And grown-ups too don't know how to be quiet.
Yeah.
They don't.
Yeah. Or know their ecosystem, especially in Prescott now that so many new people are moving into this town. They have no idea, ecologically speaking, where they live.
That's right. And there's such a wondrous story in these dry adapted ecosystems that if you can just awaken that in people and adults, I can't say that there was no joy in teaching adults, because there was. I loved developing the docent program. And again, watching that awakening of seeing that these dry land adapted plants and animals were actually really amazing, and tremendous diversity here that they didn't even recognize was around them. That was huge too.
No, it's been great. Is there anything if you think about the future for the Highland Center that you would like to leave us with as a thought for the future?
Well, I think all of this that I've just described has continued, and I'm really grateful for that, of course, that it doesn't get lost in the success and the expansion and the numbers. It's really easy to love something to death. We see it at the Grand Canyon, we see it at the Highland Center site to some degree, but that we keep remembering that it's nature that we're trying to honor and learn about. And yes, we want a lot of people to come, but we don't want to lose that essence of things.
We don't want to kill what we're trying
to protect. What we're trying to love.
Yeah.
And you've done a great job in keeping this going through some. Obviously, 2007 was a difficult time, and then COVID, and it's amazing. I think the resilience speaks to the health of the organization, and I'd like to, keep to seeing that, and I see it. So, the Discovery Garden is a great draw for a different kind of person, and all of that is still there. So, anyway.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for all the effort and all the time and energy that you put into creating this organization, and your continued involvement and reflection and guidance as we move forward.
Okay. Well, it was great being here this week. It really was.
Yeah, it's great having you back here at the community.
At the Community Nature
where it all
Center,
began.
Where it all began is still a really special little place.
So, and thank you so much for visiting with us and watching our videos and celebrating our 25th anniversary with us. And if you want to find out what's happening today at the Highland Center, just go to our website at highlandcenter.org and have some of these kind of adventures that we just talked about for yourself and for your family and your children. Thanks so much, and have a great day.